So, I'm very pleased to welcome Craig Thaine as today's presenter. I'll just give you a bit of background to Craig, and I'm going to have to make a deep breath here because he's done quite a lot. So, co-author of Cambridge English in Power, Craig has been involved in ELT for 30 years. He is Cambridge DTE FLA qualified and also has a MA Honours in Applied Linguistics. He has worked as a teacher and a teacher trainer in many countries, including England, Italy, Egypt, Sweden and New Zealand. He is Director of Teacher Training at Languages International, Auckland, and is a Cambridge English Language Assessment Teaching Awards Assessor for both CELTA and Delta schemes. Craig has extensive experience developing and teaching English language courses to adult learners, including ESP and EAP courses. Craig is co-author of Real Listening and Speaking Level 2, as well as being author of Teacher Training Essentials and Cambridge Academic English Intermediate. His publications include Real Listening and Speaking 2, that's Cambridge English Skills, Teacher Training Essentials, and Cambridge Academic English. So, after that nice introduction, over to you, Craig.
Thank you very much, Simon, and hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining the seminar today, Manageable Learning and Practice. So I think starting in Brazil, where I think it's very early morning, so thank you very much for getting up so early, and basically kind of moving across the Atlantic, saying good morning to people in Europe, and then across the Middle East and Asia. I imagine we're getting into kind of afternoon, and then finally anyone who's on my side of the world, good evening. I'm delivering this seminar from Auckland in New Zealand, and it's currently 9 p.m. So good evening from New Zealand. So let's get underway. We've got quite a bit that I want to look at this evening, or today, and I'd like to start with a task. We're going to look at the issue of manageable learning and some of the problems that can come up that make learning unmanageable for our students. And I'd like to start with a typical problem, and in fact this problem is based on my own experience. It was last year. I was teaching an elementary level class, and I had a problem a little bit like this. So I taught 20 vocabulary items, some adjectives. They were antonym sets like old versus new. And this was towards the beginning of the week, and at the end of the week most of the students could remember on average about 8 of the 20 vocabulary items that I had taught them. So what I'd like you to do, if you could type into the chat, what do you think was probably the cause of the problem? Was it A, the presentation was unclear, I taught the words badly, B, there were too many words, or C, the students were lazy and didn't do their homework? So let's see what people are saying. Okay, there seems to be almost unanimous agreement that it was B, and in fact this in fact was the case with this group of students, because I talked to them about it. I said, you know, why was it so difficult? And their comment was there were too many words, and I have to agree with them. So this is one of the problems associated with manageable learning, and why I think about manageable learning. So let's have a look at what I mean by manageable learning. So first of all, it's how much we aim to teach. Oops, the slide just jumped. There we go. It's associated with how much we aim to teach. So in this situation that we've just looked at, I was trying to teach too much. But it also includes what we teach. What language are we teaching? And we're going to look at that. It also is concerned with the kind of information that we provide learners with. And it also is to do with how we go about teaching language, the kind of methodology that we use. So these are the things that I'm going to be looking at in the seminar. And when I'm talking about teaching of language, teaching of vocabulary, and teaching of grammar in the seminar, what I am focusing on is productive use of language. So what I mean is, I want learners to be able to use this language in a communicative situation. It's not just pre-teaching language so that they can understand it, say, in a reading text. Look at manageable learning. So we don't want to overload learners. We want to optimize their cognitive effort. I mean, they work hard. They have to use their brains quite a lot when they're studying English, so we want to make that as easy as possible. We also want to be sure that our lessons are not so difficult that learners will have a negative feeling about them and won't be motivated to learn. So that's an important part of manageable learning. The other thing, obviously, we want to preempt any problems that learners might have with language. In other words, we don't want to set them up to fail. So if we can see there's going to be a problem with language, we want to try and help them avoid that. And also, at the same time, we want to give learners a sense of progress and achievement. And that's another side of manageable learning, this idea that they're moving forward with their language. So what we're trying to do with manageable learning, we're trying to take the frustration out of learning for your students, and we want to be able to teach them language that they can actually use. So here's another question for you. Think of a typical B1, a pre-intermediate level class. How much new vocabulary would you teach in a 90-minute lesson with a B1 level class? So perhaps if you could type that into the chat box. Okay, so there's kind of range. Yeah, there's quite a lot of variety. Now, that's what I had anticipated, because the simple answer to this question is that there is no clear answer, because there are a lot of variables. So it depends on the individual learners in your group. If you've got a very strong learner group, you can teach more vocabulary. It depends on the meaning of the lexis. So if it's easy to get across, if it's easy to convey the meaning, it'll be easier to teach more words. However, if it's more complex, maybe you can't teach as many words. It will also depend if you're teaching in a monolingual situation. So between English and some language, there are a lot of what we call cognates. So for example, the word architect in English, if I'm teaching that in Italy, the Italian word for architect is architetto. So that is not going to be a difficult word for Italian learners of English. So if the word is a cognate in that way, then perhaps you can teach a few more. In my own particular context, I teach in New Zealand, I teach multilingual classes. For a B1 level class, I would probably aim to teach about 12 new words in 90 minutes on average. That's not a hard and fast rule, it's an approximate rule. And I think the key thing is really that to think about and assess and evaluate how well your learners are coping with vocabulary in terms of how much you teach them. So see how they're going with it, and if you feel it's too much, cut it back. If you feel they're not getting enough, you can increase it. So try to be sensitive to learners' needs and to what they can cope with, what is manageable for them. Now, more interestingly, let's have a look at what we can teach. I was using some teaching materials earlier this year at B1 level, pre-intermediate level, and in the materials I was using, this came up as a lexical set, words to do with crime and punishment to a certain degree. So this was in the materials that I was using. You don't need to type this into the chat, but what I'd just like you to look at this list for a minute and think about, and maybe just write down on a piece of paper, would you teach all of these words at pre-intermediate level, or only some of them? How many would you teach, roughly? But as I said, you don't need to type it into chat if you don't want to. You can just make a note. So hopefully that's enough time for you to have a look at those words. Now, in terms of making decisions, my instinctive feeling about this particular lexical set was that I thought it was going to be quite difficult for my pre-intermediate level class. I thought this is quite tricky for them. And in fact, there is some help that you can get now. There is a free resource, and it's called English Profile, and this will actually tell you what vocabulary is teachable and learnable, more importantly, what's learnable for learners at specific levels. Now, English Profile, that's the website address there. It's a free resource. All you have to do is go online and register, and then you're free to access, and you can check vocabulary and check what is learnable at specific CEFR levels. So just a little bit of background on it. It's based on the Cambridge Learner Corpus. So the data has been taken from Cambridge exams. So that this is evidence of what learners can actually produce in terms of language at certain levels. There are about 200,000 exam scripts, but I think it's increasing all the time. 55 million words, 143 first language backgrounds. And the vocabulary and the grammar is analysed by researchers, and then they tag it to the Council of Europe framework of reference levels, and obviously it's what learners can produce, and this gives us some insight into terms of what language learners are able to learn and use at different levels. So I took that lexical set of crime vocabulary and I put it through, I tested it with English Profile, and this is what I found out, that only a few of those words, in fact, are B1 level words, and some of them, like prison sentence, community service, and fraud, are very, very high level words. So what English Profile tells us is that learners probably aren't going to do much good at learning a word like community service until they're at C1 level. Now, community service is quite interesting because you've got two words there, community and service, but it's not looking at the individual words, it's looking at the whole meaning of that noun phrase, community service. So it also indicates that police officer and steel are at A2 level, so they're actually below the level. However, broadly speaking, when I looked at this lexical set, I sort of thought, well, actually there are only a few words really that are learnable, and I sort of came to the conclusion that maybe crime and punishment is not a good lexical set at pre-intermediate level. So that's interesting to explore. So if you are concerned about vocabulary and you think this is going to be too difficult for my students, you can go to English Profile and find out what you can teach. And you can also do other searches. You can do topic searches of, like, you know, the natural world, and it will give you all the words that to do with the environment, say at B1 or B2 level or whatever. There's a great variety of searches, so it's a very good resource. So now I'd like to move on to the next part, how to clarify vocabulary. So this is where we're going to kind of spend most time, because I think it's the how to teach stuff often that's most useful for teachers. At A2 level, we can often, A1 and A2 level, we can often deal with vocabulary quite successfully just with visuals. That makes it very easy to use. And I mean, something like Google Images, where you can actually just get a visual very, very quickly and very easily, makes that very, very manageable. However, at B1 level, already we're beginning to deal with vocabulary items that are a little bit more abstract in terms of what they're referring to, and we're often looking at phrasal verbs that don't have a literal meaning. So what I'm going to look at is an English-only approach to teaching a set of multi-word verbs. So I worked on Cambridge English and Power, as Simon noted in the introduction. So what I've done is I've chosen the B1 level, and there is a section that there's a lesson, I think it's in Unit 10, that focuses on some multi-word verbs. So I'm going to choose 4 of those as an example. So the first item is carried on or carry on, look after, hand in, and put off. So those are the 4 phrasal verbs that we're going to look at this evening, or today, or this morning, wherever you are in the world. So in the next 4 slides, what I'm going to show you is a description of how a teacher might teach these words. So using the pictures that you saw, and I'll repeat those in each individual slide, there'll be an explanation of how the teacher might teach that word to actually get it across to students. So as you're looking at each slide, what I'd like you to think about, again, you don't need to type anything into the chat as yet. We will after we've seen all 4 slides. But just think about how clear is the meaning of each phrasal verb, and how involved do you think the learners are in learning these new words? Okay, so number 1, carry on. The teacher says, look at the picture. Can you see? The man hits the car, it's an accident, and then the man carries on driving. He just carries on. In the past, we say carried on. He hit the car and carried on. So just think about meaning, student involvement. Look after. So the teacher says, she opened the door and there was the cat. Now, she's going to look after the cat. Okay, look after the cat. So think about the meaning and student involvement. Hand in. Can you see? He's found some money. It looks like quite a lot of money. Isn't he lucky? But now he's going to hand it in. And the last one, put off. Look at the woman and look at the clock. It's 6 o'clock. She has to work late. She's worried about Georgie's dinner at 7 p.m. She's thinking she'll put it off. Okay, so how clear is the meaning? So here you can type into the chat. How clear is the meaning? Clear, clear sometimes, not clear at all. How involved do you think the learners were in learning these new words? So I'll just give you a moment or two to make your choice. Okay, that's great. So yes, I 100% agree with your answers that in terms of getting the meaning across, maybe it's clear sometimes, but more often than not, it's not very clear at all. And the students aren't very involved. I mean, obviously, I've made up these teacher explanations. Sometimes in my work as a teacher trainer, I see teachers teach a little bit in that way, where perhaps they are overly reliant on the visual that they're holding up and showing, and they're assuming that learners are inferring meaning from the visual, and their explanation perhaps is not quite as clear as it could be. So what I'm going to show you in the next few slides are what the learners might understand as a result of that teacher explanation. I mean, there's no reason why they couldn't actually infer what I'm going to show you on the basis of what the teacher has said. So, with this explanation of carry on, the teacher might think that it means the learner, the student, might think that carry on means drive with difficulty. Then, with look after, the teacher might, the student might think that look after means look at the cat until it goes away. And that would be a very, very plausible understanding of that word from that explanation. So, with hand in, they might think that it means touch with his hands. That's what it looks like he's about to do. So there's nothing in that explanation that would lead them to think otherwise. And then in the last one, the student might infer, well, she's going to try to get George's meal ready by 7 p.m. So this is where you've got this sort of breakdown in meaning. So I can see someone here has asked about student involvement. So we're going to get to that in a minute. All right. So at the moment, I'm just dealing with the first part of how clear is the meaning, and then we're going to get to student involvement. Okay. So what the point I'm making here is that teacher explanation sometimes isn't detailed or clear enough for students to get a full understanding of the words. So here is what I would think is a slightly better illustration of the meaning. So he hit the car and carried on. He didn't stop to check the damage. So the extra bit in italics, I think, gives a clearer idea of the meaning. And then She's going to let the lost cat stay and feed it. She's going to look after it until she finds the owner. So in these explanations, there's a little bit more meaning, which gives the learners a clearer idea about the meaning of the verb. So what this means for us as teachers is we need to think clearly that we are giving a full explanation of the meaning when we want to illustrate it. So just holding up a picture alone for words which are not obvious means that we need to back it up with clear explanations. So a small task. Here you've got two versions for hand in. Which do you think illustrates the meaning in a more satisfactory way? So type into the chat, A or B? Which explanation do you think is better? Great, everyone is coming out with B. So yes, B is much, much clearer. Fantastic. So let's try another one. So here, which version do you think is better for put off? A or B for put off? Again, you can type into the chat. Yes, in fact, yes, A is definitely the better one. Saying sorry in B doesn't really help with the meaning. I mean, she may say sorry, but that doesn't actually. But to put off the dinner to another day, she'll have to say no and suggest another day. So I think that makes it clearer. Okay, so someone just before was asking about learner involvement. So this is what I mean by learner involvement. Learner involvement is once you've illustrated the meaning to students, often it's a good idea to check that they have understood, and in order to do so you need to ask questions, and what I call these are concept check questions, oral questions where you want to be sure that they have understood. So first you illustrate the meaning, you explain the meaning, and then you ask questions to check that learners have understood. So here is an example concept question that I might ask with carry on. So if you carry on doing something, do you continue doing it? Do you stop doing it? And you would want the students to say yes, to answer yes to the first question and no to the second one. Again, another example with look after. If you look after an animal, do you take care of it? Yes. Can you look after a person? Yes. Can you look after a thing? So you can see with the concept questions here, I'm also indirectly, well, quite directly, checking collocation as well, that we can use look after not just for animals, but we can use it to talk about people. You might look after a child or to look after a precious object of some kind. So this is what I mean by learner involvement. By asking the questions, you're involving the learners in the negotiation of meaning. So another task, here are 4 concept questions for hand in, but one of them I don't think is necessary. So can you read the 4 questions and decide which one do you think is not necessary? Yes, I agree that C really is not necessary, whereas the others I think are all useful in terms of how you can actually use that word. And also note in D this idea of handing in an essay, so that it's a similar meaning of giving something in like money, but also something like an essay. And here's another example, put off. Again, can you choose the question that is probably not necessary? Yes, good. So B is the one that is not necessary. So writing it down is not really important, but the other ones I think are all useful. And again, notice the collocation type questions in D&E where you're checking, can you put off a meeting? Can you put off a medical appointment of some kind? So these are what I mean by concept questions. So in order to write concept questions, it's a good idea to use simple language. And you want to make sure that the answers to these questions are easy. So if the answers are maybe just yes, no, maybe, or just a simple phrase, and I often find binary questions, is it this or is it that? I often find that they work well. It's a very good idea to refer to very obvious contexts and obvious examples. So if there are examples that you know that your learners will know about, use those. It's better to be obvious rather than obscure. Try to cover all aspects of the meaning, but just focus on one meaning of a word at a time. So, I mean, for example, if you wanted to teach the word bank, I would only focus on bank as a place to put money. If it were a low-level student, I wouldn't focus on the word riverbank, for example. And then finally, the one question to avoid as a concept question is, what does mean? What does that word mean? So the reason for doing that is that the answer to that question is really a dictionary definition. And our students are learners, they are not dictionary writers, so I think that's asking them what does it mean is an unfair question, because it means they more or less have to come up with a dictionary meaning. So it's better if we can think about the concept questions and frame them in a way so that they're manageable and answerable. So I think you can see that in terms of thinking about the meaning, how you're going to illustrate the meaning, and thinking about the concept questions, these are all things that you need to do when you're planning your lessons, obviously. So here's another problem. After the accident, he carry on driving. So what's the problem here? Can you type this into the chat? What do you think the problem is? Yes, good. So the wrong verb form, a lot of you are typing the wrong verb form and driving. And in fact, so what we also need to do often, we need to think about what comes around vocabulary, before and after vocabulary. Is there a dependent preposition? What form of the verb do we use after it? So these are all issues to do with form. So looking at the other three of these phrasal verbs, what feature of form do you think you might highlight? She looked after the lost cat for the week. She handed in the lost money to the police. She put off her dinner until 8 p.m. So these are all correct, but can anyone see what could, it's not a problem here, but what could be a problem with these words? So just wait a minute, people are typing into the chat. Good, yeah, so already people, yeah, the word order, the separation. So you're a fantastic group of teachers, so that's really good. So in effect, we can't say she looked the lost cat after, but we can say he handed in the lost money, she put off the dinner. So, I mean, the reason for that is because after is a preposition and in and off in this case are in fact adverbs. I don't think with a pre-intermediate level class I would use that grammar terminology. I would just show them with something like, as I've got on screen at the moment, that we can't say that and put a cross beside it and just indicate that for that one we can't put the object in the middle. And for looking at the reason why I would perhaps teach at a higher level. But again, all I'm trying to highlight here is the fact that we also, apart from the meaning with vocabulary, we also need to think about the form. So here's another problem. After an accident, you shouldn't carry on driving. Can you put off your dinner until later? So what do you think is going on here? What potentially is the problem here? I can see people are typing away. And yes, pronunciation someone's come up with. Sounds, yeah, good. Okay. There could be issues to do with form, that students, it could be a problem that they think that they need an ing form after shouldn't. That is a possibility. But what I was thinking of here is, in fact, as some of you have pointed out, the sounds and the pronunciation. So, in effect, what the learners are saying are carrying instead of carry on. And they're saying put of instead of put off. So what this means is when we're teaching new vocabulary, obviously we need to give a very clear oral model, and I think it actually helps to drill the words so that students actually get to experience them and get to have a feel and certainly an ear for the pronunciation. So this is the other final dimension. So now to kind of summarize, this is perhaps a more successful way in which I might deal with this vocabulary if I were teaching it for productive use. So I would look at the picture and say, okay, what happened? He hit the car. He didn't check the damage. He didn't leave a note. What can we say? He continued. Okay, that's correct. And then maybe if the students can't give the word, I would say it and say, okay, he carried on driving. And then I would concept check it, and then I would get them to listen, carried on driving, get them to repeat. And then on the whiteboard, I'd make it very clear that there is a carry on plus verb ing. I would highlight that at the whiteboard. But can you see here that with the elicitation questions and the concept questions, I'm using questions far more and trying to involve students in the language a lot more. So more or less something along these lines is probably how I would try to deal with this vocabulary. And my overall aim in doing so would be to try and guide students through the meaning and make the learning manageable for them. And that really is the aim. Okay, so here's a summary. To generalize this example, we need to illustrate meaning clearly, elicit or give the word, check the concept with questions, highlight aspects of form if necessary, model and drill the pronunciation, and then give learners a written record of the word on the board in some way. So clearly, the kind of implicit message here also is, in order to do this, we need to kind of think about it before we go into the lesson and plan what we're going to ask and say and do often. I mean, to actually sort of come up with these questions is not easy on the spot, and it's often useful to look at a dictionary to make sure that you are covering all aspects of the meaning. And I still use an English dictionary sometimes when I want to write a concept question, just to help me get the meaning clear in my mind. Okay, so I want to move on to grammar now, and we're going to look at the present perfect. So if you've got an elementary level class, A2 level class, here are 5 different uses of the present perfect. So which of these would you deal with at elementary level? So the first one is, I've never been to New Zealand, so that's the experience use. I've just spoken to Chris, that's the recent past use using the adverb just. I haven't tried the new Spanish restaurant yet, events not completed with yet. I've lived here since 2010, so that's duration with since. I haven't seen you for a long time, and that's the period of time use with the preposition for. Okay, so there's a range of choices. And that's nice. There's no agreement. I like that. I always like it when people have got different points of view. It's always far more interesting. So, yet again, English Profile, just this year in fact, now has a grammar search function as well. So you can go to English Profile for vocabulary, but also you can go to English Profile for grammar, and you can search which tenses, which noun phrases, quantifiers, a whole range of different grammar items are learnable at a different level. The fantastic thing about the English Profile grammar thing is that the tenses are tagged according to their functional use. So all those different uses that I illustrated there, they are all listed individually in English Profile grammar. So this is what it had to say about these particular uses. And I found this very interesting. So I thought that, for example, number 2, I would have perhaps taught at A2 level, but I may not have taught number 3 at A2 level. So the results here surprised me. They didn't exactly match my intuition in terms of what I would typically teach. So this information is really interesting. So manageable learning and grammar. So it's interesting that English profile tells us that learners can often acquire more or less than we think. And I think that corpus linguistics and resources like English profile are eventually going to change grammar syllabi over time. I don't think they're going to change them in a dramatic way, but I think that there will perhaps be some changes in the future in terms of what we teach when, because the researchers have noted some actually quite surprising results of what is learnable at certain levels. And the nice thing is that you can already go to English profile yourself and check your assumptions. It's actually quite, if you're interested in language, I think it's a fun and interesting thing to do. So think, okay, I wonder what level that will be, and you can do a search and find out. So it is an interesting resource, and once again, it's freely available online. You don't have to pay for it at all. So now I'd like to move on to look at teaching grammar. So again, I'm referring here to a resource that I used recently. I slightly changed the context, but the materials that I was using had a dialogue similar to this. Have you seen Mockingjay? The third Hunger Games film? That's right. No, I haven't. I've read the book. Shall we read the DVD? Shall we watch the DVD tonight? Yeah, why not? So this was a little mini dialogue to exemplify the present perfect. Now, in the resources that I was using, questions 1, 2, and 3 were the ways of clarifying the language. So I've read the book, and then the students have to look at the negative form, and then they have to write in the question form, and then they have to think about what happens if they use I, he, or she. Does it when we change I to he or she? And then there's a question, I've read the book, is the time important in the example? And I felt that this didn't quite work for me. It felt a little bit thin, and I felt it was kind of problematic in some way in terms of dealing with grammar. So the first issue I had was the fact that it dealt in tasks 1 and 2, it was immediately looking at the form of the language before it had really kind of considered whether students had understood how to actually use the tense or the verb phrase it was being focused on. So my first kind of reaction was that I wanted to actually put question 3 in the first position, because I felt it is better to actually get students to understand what the grammar means and what it's saying before we look at how we make it. So that's the first change that I wanted to make. But even then, I actually wasn't entirely satisfied, because I felt that the question that the resource provided was a little bit thin. It actually didn't cover the meaning terribly well. And what I felt needed to happen was it needed some more detailed questions to really deal with the meaning in a clear way so it was manageable for students. So I decided to rewrite the questions focusing on form. So is B talking about the past or present? So we establish the time reference. Do we know when in the past? And of course we don't, and that's the whole point behind the present perfect. And is it important to know when? And in using the present perfect, of course, it's not. So I felt it needed a little bit more detail in terms of dealing with the meaning. And then putting it together in this way, and then having the form tasks coming later, I felt was a more successful focus on the meaning and the form of this language, and I felt that this would be more manageable for students. The other thing that I would get students to do with this is, rather than actually asking the questions aloud, I'd actually give them this activity and get them to talk about it together, because I think that that gives them a little bit of thinking time. So they can actually read the example, think about the questions, talk to each other, check with each other, help each other filling in the form, etc. And I think that getting students to do it in pairs or small groups can support them and make it a lot more manageable. So, manageable learning and clarifying grammar, what I think, to summarize the kind of key points I've been making here about the teaching of grammar, is I think that it's useful to focus on meaning before form, so that students understand what the grammar, what time it's referring to. Make sure that you give concept questions that go into enough detail. Write the concept questions down. Get the learners to do it in pairs and give them thinking time. And then maybe ask them some more oral questions when you do feedback on the grammar task to double check that they actually have understood the grammar well enough. So this is a kind of, typically I use a procedure like this when I'm dealing with grammar, purely and simply because I think that it is more manageable for learners. So what I think, what's emerging here in terms of, we've looked at vocabulary in quite a bit of detail, and we've just also now looked at grammar, and what's emerging from this is the fact that manageable learning is often associated with using questions in the classroom. So questions are quite powerful. So we can use them to elicit and check language. It's more learner-centered, this idea of learner involvement, so it gets learners involved in the explanation of vocabulary and grammar. And it also allows teachers to evaluate, because if you're asking questions, careful questions, and you're getting the wrong answers, that will tell you that learners have not understood, which in turn means you need to do something about it to actually help and support your learners. So questions are often associated with an approach to language teaching called learning-oriented assessment. So this approach focuses on ongoing and a formal evaluation of your learners, because I think that whenever we go into the classroom in one way or another, we are kind of evaluating learners' progress and have they understood that? Are they able to use that? What was their pronunciation like? Was it clear enough? So we're constantly evaluating learners, and I think that's a good way to teach, because it means that we are thinking about our learners and concerned with their needs on an ongoing basis every day. And obviously questions are a powerful tool in a learning-oriented assessment approach to teaching. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail about learning-oriented assessment. I've actually done a previous webinar on this called Tuning Into Your Learners, which I think is available on the Cambridge website. So if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about learning-oriented assessment, you can tune into that webinar. It's on YouTube or on the Cambridge website. But looking at Cambridge Empower, which is the coursebook series that I worked on, manageable learning and learning-oriented assessment were two key principles that we tried to implement in writing Cambridge English Empower. So another way that you can get information on learning-oriented assessment is by looking, if you have this course book in your staff room, if you look in the introduction to the teacher's book for Cambridge English Empower, there is a very clear summary of learning-oriented assessment. And included in the introduction, it focuses on some of the teaching techniques that I've mentioned in this webinar so far. So looking at monitoring, but also eliciting, concept checking, drilling, giving feedback to learners. And there's this nice table where it looks at what the main core aims of these teaching techniques are, but it also looks at the learning-oriented assessment aims. And then spread throughout the teacher's book of Cambridge English Empower, there are learning-oriented assessment tips. So here's one example, and this is on concept checking, which we were looking at earlier on, and it's showing you some example concept questions that you could ask with some vocab that's being taught in that book. So you've got these learning-oriented assessment tips focusing on these teaching skills that are spread throughout Cambridge English Empower. So that's quite a useful resource. So, in summary, manageable learning means that we think about language we teach and how we're going to teach it. So this thinking needs to take place at the planning stage. So I'm not saying that you need to plan in this degree of detail for every single thing that you teach, but when you're teaching important new language, important new vocabulary, and important new grammar that you hope that your learners are going to be able to use, then we do need to think about how we're going to deal with it, how we're going to illustrate the meaning. Is showing a picture enough? Maybe not. We also need to explain a little bit or try and elicit a little bit, and we need to involve learners by concept checking. We also need to support learners by giving them enough information about language. So here I'm kind of referring to this idea of form, where you make sure that you say things like, this is followed by an ing form, or, on is the preposition that comes after this particular phrase or verb or whatever. So you look at what's happening around words. And certainly, if you're checking the meaning of grammar, you need to make sure that all aspects of the meaning are covered. So the information about the meaning of language is important. And there's this idea of using questions a lot in our teaching, because this really does help learner involvement, and it does make our lessons more learner-centered, and it engages learners a lot more. And also, manageable learning obviously adheres to a learning-oriented assessment approach to teaching, and there is more information in Cambridge English Empowered Teachers book and on the webinar that I did online. And then the final point I'd just like to remind everyone of is Cambridge English Profile, where we've looked at examples of how sets of vocabulary and different uses of grammar can be researched online with this free resource. So if you've ever got a problem in terms of, do you think this is going to be too difficult for my learners, you actually can go somewhere and find out and get some feedback. Great, so that's the end of the webinar. So thank you very much for listening. So now I think we've got time for some questions.
Great, thank you very much. I'd just like to say thanks for that, Craig. That was really good, very interesting. Please let me know if you have any questions. Please type them in. We do have some questions to kick off with, so I'll just put a couple to you here, Craig.
Sure.
First one here I've got is from Efrosini, and the question is, should the English Profile site and the content of it really just be a guide as to when to teach at which appropriate level? And I think she's raised the point about what about repetition of the same grammar, of the same vocabulary at different levels as well. So do you know what I mean? Should it just be introduced at that level it says, or should you repeat?
No, I think it definitely should be repeated. No, I would agree also that English Profile should be used as a guide. I mean, it's an incredibly useful guide, because there's always going to be variation in terms of the nationality that you're teaching. As I mentioned before, there could be cognates, or there could be certain grammar tenses which are very easy for some nationalities and not others. And also, I mean, obviously, I think probably most teachers would agree that there are some learners who are stronger and some who are weaker. So you will need to sort of vary it according to the learners you've got and the context that you're in. But I think it's a useful tool, particularly if you feel that things are getting too challenging for your learners, and if you're worried about that. I mean, really, for years, I've been teaching for 30 years, and up until English Profile, really, I've just gone on the consensus of colleagues and my own intuition. Whereas here, you've got something that's actually where it's coming from a learner corpus. Corpus linguists have done research on it and got information from it. So you've got a really useful resource that you can refer to, which is very, very solid. And but it's like any of these things. It shouldn't become something that becomes a burden. It should be seen as a resource. And I certainly agree that this is when you should teach something for the very first time, but inevitably you're going to need to repeat and revise things at higher level. You move up. So, I mean, typically you might teach a couple of uses of the present perfect, and at the next level you would introduce some more uses, but at the same time you would perhaps go back and contrast and compare it with previous uses that you've taught. So yes, I would definitely agree with that.
Great. Question from Linda. Do you think using movies to watch and music to listen to is a good way to practice and learn vocabulary?
I think it can be. I think that watching movies and listening to music is a good way, perhaps, of reinforcing vocabulary, of sort of exposing learners to something that you previously taught. I think that if you, and certainly movies and songs are in effect texts, so that you could get them to watch a movie and then you could highlight some vocabulary and teach it that way, and actually use a little excerpt from the movie, like there could be a little bit of dialogue, and use that excerpt as a context in order to deal with the meaning, and likewise you could deal with vocabulary from a song as a context to deal with the meaning. But I still think that you would need to go through a similar kind of procedure that I've outlined in terms of focusing on the language in an explicit way once you've actually highlighted that target language. So just getting them to watch the movie and hope that they will pick up the vocabulary, or getting them to listen to the song and hope that they'll pick up the vocabulary, I think that could be hard if you want learners to learn those words or those grammar points for productive use. So I guess what I'm saying is that films and movies and songs can be a good context to clarify language, to go through the kind of procedure that we looked at tonight, so using that as your context, or having gone through that procedure, if that vocabulary comes up in a film or a song, that is a nice way to review it or revise it. And there's no doubt about it that movies and songs are very motivating for learners, because they're authentic, they're associated with entertainment, and it's often a really, really effective way to either teach language or to practice or reinforce it.
Great. Well, good question. Interesting question here from Elena, which is, have you ever worked in kindergarten or with very young learners when dealing with kids who are not able to write? Should we stress more the other aspects other than pronunciation? So basically, little kids that really can't write.
Right. So the simple answer is, have I ever worked in the kindergarten? No. So I'll be perfectly honest about that. Most of my experience has been teaching adult learners. Very early in my career, I taught some primary school students in Italy, and I don't think I did a very good job, but that's beside the point. But I think... Sorry?
There was also a question linked to people with like dyslexia and stuff, so that might be a similar thing, people that have difficulty with writing, or younger kids that can't write. I mean, how would you...
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, the kind of, in effect, the kind of approach that I've been looking at tonight is mostly oral, and mostly involves oral questioning. I mean, obviously I've written them down in the slides. So, in effect, younger learners, very young learners who maybe can't read and write in their first language because they're still learning to do so, obviously I would not have a stage in the lesson where they needed to write up the words, where I wrote up the words on the whiteboard. And likewise, someone who has maybe got dyslexia problems, then I would probably check with them as an individual and find out what's going to work best for them. So maybe they can cope with an oral-only approach and they don't want to have it written down. Or if a learner has got problems where they would have a problem, say, copying information from the whiteboard, In fact, I did have a student like that once, and what I would do is I would actually write out the summary and hand it to them and give it to them, because I think people have different levels of dyslexia, but this particular student, if I gave her a written model, she could process that information slowly in her own time, but trying to copy from the whiteboard was too much of a challenge. But most of the rest of the approach that I've looked at tonight has been okay. Obviously not with the grammar, because particularly with younger learners, that kind of approach where you are writing down concept questions, I would probably never do that with younger learners if I were teaching them. Not that I do, but any reading that I've done with teaching young learners basically suggests that you don't deal with, particularly with grammar, in a kind of a way when you look at the kind of explicit meaning and form of language. So that would be my approach.
Right, thank you. Another question here from Layla. Some very good questions coming in. What do you think is the most productive way to put new vocabulary into practice? This is always a test, isn't it? If you don't actually live in that country you're trying to learn the language in, you can't just go into the street and use it straight away.
Indeed. Yeah, indeed. So, the most productive way I believe is, if possible, if you can find a way of getting the learners to personalize the vocabulary in a kind of a spoken oral activity, so that they can actually use the new words to talk about themselves or their own lives or their experiences in some ways. I always think that is particularly effective. If it's possible. It's not possible with every lexical set that you teach, but that's always my first instinct, because I think that it's more, vocabulary becomes more meaningful if you can relate it to your own life. And in Empower, that's something that we've actually tried to do a lot of in the when we do focus on vocabulary. We include a lot of what I call personalization activities, where we get learners to practice at talking about their own lives. The other thing is if that's not possible, try to find some kind of communicative activity, like a role play, where there's some kind of information gap in some way, so that learners are able, even if they can't talk about themselves, they can maybe pretend to be someone else and actually use it in a communicative way. So I always think that's a great thing to do in the classroom. I try to avoid using gap fill activities in the classroom. I think they're better done at home as homework. I don't think it's a good use of classroom time myself. It's certainly in my context. I want to get learners actually trying to use the vocabulary as much as possible through communicative activities, through personalization exercises.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think we might have time for one, possibly two more. Oksana asks, are you for or against, direct translation, maybe with monolingual groups, if you're just looking up in the dictionary, as opposed to, kind of working it out and thinking it through in the examples that you'd provide?
I'm for translation in monolingual contexts. I don't teach in a monolingual context myself at the moment. I'm for a sort of a circumspect use. The reason is, I think that why spend a long time sort of doing something very elaborate when you can actually just say the word in the learner's first language and they will get it immediately? It's far more efficient. But one of the things that I think you have to be careful about in terms of using translation is you have to manage it carefully, because it can become a slippery slope in terms of, the English lesson then actually turns into a lesson where you are only using the student's first language and you're not using English at all. So I think what I would call judicious use of translation is a very useful tool, very, very powerful tool. But you need to set clear boundaries with the students and make it very clear that, we will use your first language from time to time, but our ultimate aim is to be trying to use as much English as possible. Because basically, if students are not getting English practice in your classroom, and they're living in a non-English speaking country, they're probably not going to be getting English spoken practice anywhere else. I mean, I have the luxury living in New Zealand, as I know that my students, when they walk out the door, they have, they have to talk to the bus driver, they have to talk to the people in shops, they have to talk to their homestay parents or whatever. They do speak a lot of English outside the classroom, but I know from having taught in a monolingual context that students don't get English language practice outside the classroom. And I taught in Italy and I do speak Italian, and students would often try and get me to speak as much Italian as possible, and I could feel myself being pulled into their, and it was turning into an Italian lesson for me that they were paying for, which was kind of crazy. So yes, I think translation is useful, I think it's very efficient, but I think it needs to be managed carefully.
Great. I think I had a similar problem in Greece where my students were saying, "Why don't you speak Greek? The last teacher spoke Greek."
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. I think that's all we've got time for. Thanks a lot. There were some really good questions coming through there. So don't forget to check the page for details of our upcoming webinars, which you can visit by going to cambridge.org/ELT events. And the recording of today's webinar should be live on our blog and YouTube channel next week. And don't forget to download your certificate from the link on the screen, which I believe is being put in now. So thank you. Thanks once again, Craig. Thanks a lot for that. Well,
thank you, everyone, and thank you for your questions have been really good, and your comments and all the way through. So it's been great to have a really nice group of teachers. So thank you very much for tuning in, and good night.
Yeah, we'll let you enjoy the rest of your week. All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
For coming along as well. Thank you.